ready tonight? Second to last? Yeah, that's right.
Who's counting?
Good evening and welcome. We're really pleased to see you all here tonight. And I'd like to call to order our Wednesday, October 3rd regular meeting of council. It's now exactly 7 p.m. And the first item of always a call to order and then the reminder of any declaration of a conflict of interest that councillors may have on material we're dealing with to let us know at the right time and recuse yourselves. Just a reminder that they do come up at different times. And second, a motion to adopt the agenda. And first we'll get that on the floor. Thank you, Councillor Mueller, Councillor Lutz. And before we go any further, Corporate Officer Frank.
Thank you, Your Worship. Staff requests that that Council pull 8.1 from the agenda, and we will bring it forward to the next meeting. We just noticed there's some errors in the bylaw that's attached. We'll bring it forward next meeting for 3 readings.
Okay, so deletion of 8.1, which was for adoption. So we've taken it through the 3 readings. Any other additions or deletions? Any other deletions? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion or a vote on the adopting the agenda as amended. Thank you. That's carried. None opposed. Moving then to our proclamations. We have one proclamation this evening, a very important one on World Polio Day and the work that Rotary has been doing on this issue for some decades and with some surprising success. Whereas Rotary in 1985 launched Polio Plus and spearheaded the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, which today includes the World Health Organization, U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, UNICEF, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to immunize the children of the world against polio. And whereas polio cases have dropped by 99.9% from 350,000 in 1988 to 22 in 2017, and the world stands on the threshold of eradicating the disease. And whereas to date, Rotary has contributed more than US dollars, 1.7 billion in US dollars, and countless volunteer hours to the protection of more than 2.5 billion children in 122 countries. And whereas Rotary is currently working to raise an additional 50 million American dollars per year, which will be tripled by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for a total of up to $450 million over the next 3 years in an effort to eradicate polio. Now, therefore, I, Bruce Milne, do hereby proclaim that October 24th, 2018 shall be known as World Polio Day in the District of Sechelt. And we had, with this report, or I had, some specific data on the number of cases left in the world, and they're in the low 20s. No new cases last year. It's really quite amazing to go from a worldwide scourge. And if any of you, in my case, I actually have family members who are victims of polio. It's amazing to see something like that just eradicated due to the hard work of volunteers like the Rotary Club. Yeah, on to other things. Number 5, item 5 on the agenda, minutes of the 7 p.m. regular council meeting of September 19th, 2018. A motion to receive and adopt. Thank you, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Mueller. Any errors or omissions in those minutes? Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Page 12. Frank Morrow, the director from Area A. Yes, we should just correct the spelling on his name.
Yes. M-A-U-R-O. Any other errors or omissions? All those in favor of adoption? That's carried. Minutes of the 1 p.m. Before we go to the committee minutes, are there any business arising from that council meeting? Seeing none, I'll move on to 5.2, minutes of the 1 p.m. Finance, Culture and Economic Development Committee of September 19th. Fairly brief meeting, but there were a number of items. First, a motion to receive and adopt. Thank you, Councillors Wright and Seegers. Any of those recommendations need to be pulled out for special attention? Any councillors identify any? If not, I would look for, we've adopted the minutes, but a recommendation to adopt recommendations number 1 through 17. Thank you, Councillor Lutz, Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? Any opposed? Those are carried. And we move then to the Public Works, Parks and Environment Committee of September 26th. Motion to receive, Councillor Seegers, Councillor Lutz. Any errors or omissions that people saw? And any recommendations people would like to pull out for special discussion? Councillor Seegers.
Probably recommendation 5.
Chemical storage facility?
Yes, we were actually looking for staff to give us direction based on the report that was provided to committee.
Yes. Thank you for pulling that one out. I remember those discussions. With that one out for further consideration, we have a motion to adopt recommendations 1 through 4. We'll pull out all of 5, 6, and 5, the amendments. So motion to adopt recommendations 1 through 4. Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? That's carried. Now, if we could turn to recommendation 5, there was an amendment called recommendation 6 that was carried. And then back to recommendation number 5. And there were some concerns by staff as well about whether or not we understood the full ramifications of this at the committee level. So I just want to make sure we do. Would staff be prepared to give us a little discussion on that, and then we'll open it up to the council members?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, we're concerned that the staff report perhaps wasn't as clear as it should have been, and the committee actually passed a recommendation that with one part that probably is not necessary and could cost funds that would not be necessary. The issue here really is the chemical storage facility. The fact that the work area and the storage facility are right now in the same area, and so the issue is to separate those two ideas or areas of work. One option was to build a chemical storage area inside the Water Resource Center and create a work area for the staff in another building or some structure outside. Another option was to do the opposite and have the chemical stored outside and the workers area inside. And the third option that was presented was to find a way to house both inside the building. In preliminary discussions with the proponent here, Brookside MCI, the third option was really rejected, that there really wouldn't be space in the building to ever house both areas. So we're concerned that although it was brought forward as a potential option, it really isn't one that's viable. And so the recommendation right now is to explore all 3 options and get designs for all 3. And we really just feel it wouldn't be prudent to spend money getting a design on a third option that we've already determined really wouldn't work purely because of space. So we'd certainly like to suggest the council might want to modify this to do the first 2 options in the report, which would be to find a design to have a chemical storage area either inside or outside of the Water Resource Center. And that might cover what we're planning to. And we could save money in the design.
Thank you for that. And as I recall, the staff recommendation at the time for the committee was simply to concentrate on the chemical storage inside, but committee discussion was that they wanted to look at the 2 options at least for safety or other considerations and have that come back. Is that a sense of what the committee remembers? So I think what we need at the very least is that recommendation 5 should read, the proposal from Brookside MCI be accepted in the amount of $47,500 plus PST for the design of a chemical storage area within the WRC, and that options 1 and 2 being chemical storage inside the facility or chemical storage outside the facility be brought forward to council. I want to be clear on those 2. Yeah. Councillor Seegers, seconded. Thank you, Councillor Shanks. Now discussion, so we're sure of what we're actually bringing forward. Any concerns on that? If not, then all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you for that, and that will probably save us $8,000 to $10,000 of design work for something that can't be considered. Okay. And any business arising from any of the minutes? I did ask about the council meeting minutes before, but just as we go through item 6. Then we move on to item 8, and we've deleted 8.1, which was the solid waste collection amendment for adoption, and we move to 8.2. Bylaw number 566. First, a motion to receive the report. Thank you, Councillor. Okay. Moved by Councillor Mueller and seconded by Councillor Seegers that we receive the report from the Director of Planning and Development Services. All those in favor? And I can move to Ms. Corbett for introduction to this.
Thank you, Worship, members of council. The report in front of you has 2 items in it. One is a revised bylaw that replaces the Development Approval and Procedures bylaw from 2012 and presents the Planning and Development Procedures bylaw, as well as a guide that was prepared for applicants. The actual recommendation has for first, second, and third reading, but there are some areas in it that I'll go through that I would appreciate input from council, so it may need just first and second, and I'll change for third. So the rationale for the bylaw, you're actually required under the Local Government Act. It does require anyone who, or any municipality that does adopt an OCP and a zoning bylaw to actually produce a procedures bylaw to guide how it will be evaluated and processed. So that's the point of this bylaw. The existing bylaw needed updating and clarification. I think as I mentioned at presentation to Planning Committee, in the sections on delegated authority, I actually couldn't figure out what the authority was, and so it needed some clarification, and that is an area that I'll go through with council to get some feedback on. But there were elements of it that were just very challenging to follow, and it didn't particularly respond to a lot of our applicants as to how things would get processed and what would get done, and to clarify what council's authority is in various areas. So put a little more information in this one. There was an earlier council resolution as well in 2017 to bring back information to clarify the public hearing requirements, as well as the information that was required prior to an amendment by law coming in front of public hearing. So a few things in here. One is in the notification process. So under all amendments and permits, we provide notice within 50 meters of property through written and mailed notification. I'm proposing to extend it for the amendments, so for OCP and for zoning, to 75 meters from 50, keeping the permits still at 50. So that's an area to have some discussion on. Another area, just from a procedural point of view, is changing the timing of notification coming before council. So right now what we do is when we're bringing a development variance forward, or a temporary use permit, we present the report, we have the recommendation, we discuss whether we think it should be approved or not, and then we make it subject to notification, which kind of denies the public their opportunity to have more input on there. So what I'm suggesting is that we wouldn't be seeking permission from council to actually do the notification, because it is a statutory requirement, but that we would do it early so that you have the benefit of the public input prior to us actually bringing it forward to you. The other is the posting of notice signs. It is required for amendments. There has, and we've left it at that, of just required for the amendments. There are a number of municipalities that extend beyond that. They do. Right now, our standards for the signs are quite large. They're 4x8. They're significant, intended for large-scale development. But there are a number of options if there was a desire to actually notice post more development, is we could change the standards for those, particularly things like temporary use permits or anything in the downtown area. We don't want the 4x8, it would cover the whole store, but there may be opportunities to change our sign notices for those kind of developments. Probably the most significant from a process point of view is the idea of a permission to proceed report. And the intention behind this is for where we receive an application for something that's either very large scale or it's a major departure in policy, usually under CD zones or something significant, is an opportunity to get this in front of council very early to really advise on a few things. One, does it have merit? Should it proceed? Do you want to have, if it is significant, you think we should go over and above our normal consultation process? That's an opportunity to guide us on who should actually be included in the referral. Should we go a little further in notification? Is there something else that you want to see there? Or to determine if there's a go and no go. Once we get past, so the timing of this is after we've done referral, we've done an initial compliance review, we've done an initial view of it to get it in early. Because once we get past that, where we've done our referral process, we're now advising the applicant as to what they need to do to move it forward. When we're dealing with a big development, this is extremely costly for the applicant. We're asking for the TIA, the Transportation Impact Assessment. We're asking for a lot of servicing studies. It kicks into a phenomenal amount of money. So if it's something that there just isn't a comfort level there to go down that road, or you want to see a significant change to it, it provides that opportunity to provide that guidance early. The way I have it written in the bylaw and in the procedures, it really is for those applications that would kind of go above and beyond. If it's consistent with OCP or fits within it, it's not something that would be necessary for the applicants, but something to consider as to whether there's support to do that. In terms of the procedures themselves, it outlines the steps and the requirements for each type of amendment and application for permit. It also includes the evaluation criteria to help council and committees, but also for the applicants and for the public as to how we actually view things, because there's a difference between the kind of criteria we use for zoning as opposed to a development permit. So written in some of the evaluation criteria. There's a requirement for a post-referral reporting to the applicant. This is a written statement as to the issues we have received through the referral process. We identify any known reports that might be required at this stage. So it gives the applicant something very clear as to expectation to move forward. It identifies the consultation requirements as to whether something is notice posted, whether there's notification delivered, whether there's a need for public hearing. Again, it goes through the authorities and at what stage. And it includes reapplication intervals. So I've set two different ones. So for amendments, if it has been denied by council, that it's a 12-month reapplication interval. So they can't come forward with the same item or something that looks the same in that 12-month period. For permits, I had it set at 6 months. So I didn't know if that you wanted to align that to 12 months or if 6 months seems reasonable on a DP. So again, I'll go through at the end of some areas where I just want some confirmation. Does that make sense or not? In delegated authority, so it includes the minor development permits and it defines what those are. It also allows for the renewal of a DP, so before it lapses, that's done through me, and minor amendments, so it doesn't need to come before council. It changed the construction value. We had a $40,000 and $50,000 construction value on some of them. It's very challenging in some cases to really evaluate that, so it changes it to an area calculation. Initially, when I was first doing this draft, and what shows up in here is it actually lowered the area from 100 square meters to 20 square meters. Because that was at the time we were dealing with guest cottage and accessory units and thought that that would be something that would need to come to council. If it doesn't, it might be worth going back to what was in the original delegated authority of the 100 square meters. It includes the small lot subdivisions under Development Permit Area 8. So these are the subdivision lotting between 400 and 600 square meters. And the rationale for that is that, one, I don't think DPA 8 is needed for that, but it's also that we find a lot of our applicants are bringing in subdivisions at 602. They don't want this to kick in, and I just think there's a real opportunity for them to do a little more creativity in the lotting for the subdivisions if this wasn't such a speed bump to them. So it makes it into a delegated authority to address those. So they still have to meet all the requirements of subdivision planning. I just want to make sure that we're not setting up a restriction unnecessarily to do some better lotting on the subdivisions. The other that's included is the technical. So these are mainly DPA 1 to 5 on the technical, environmental, and hazard, where they comply with the guidelines. So if something is not complying, that kicks into a council issue. But where they've complied, in a lot of them, particularly around the hazard, how they apply is to establish that foreshore setback or a protected area, and if they've met that, there's really not a lot more to say about it. They've met that requirement. So under those, would suggest that fall under delegated authority. And then the questions are more specifically are how 9.3, 9.4, and 9.5 are written in there, so to see if there's a comfort level with that. I have no personal issue on delegated authority. It's really what I tried to strike a balance with is what is fair to the applicant and what is in the public interest. And so I'm not sure if I got the balance right. There is a reconsideration option. So if this showed up, I'd bring it to you. Where under the legislation, anything that has been delegated under authority, the applicant can always request a reconsideration by council. There is a procedure written through the legislation to allow that, so that they have essentially their day in court, and they can have you reconsider the decision of the director. The flip side of that too is that if I'm ever looking at something where I really think it is under delegated authority, but I think there's a public interest, or I'm not quite sure if this really should fall within delegated authority, I have the ability to bring it in front of council. So in the applications guide, so the applications guide is a non-statutory document, so it's in addition to the bylaw, and it was intended to provide a lot more detail and a lot more on the evaluation criteria, and thought that this would be useful not only for our applicants, but also for APC members, anyone really looking at a lot of the applications. It includes our complete application checklist. This was developed a few months ago. We provide this through all our pre-application meetings. So a lot of the information in here would allow us at pre-app to just provide a very complete view to the applicants. Provides a lot more detailed evaluation criteria and the planning principles. And the critical piece, I think, on here is really outlining that notion in any evaluation, any type of processing, that we look at two things here. We look at the could you, and that's our technical evaluation of, does it fall within zoning? Does the development actually fit on the site? Is it technically feasible? But there's a lot within that of the should you that council has a lot of ability to weigh in on through our development permit area guidelines. And so this outlines that a little bit more, that it's not enough to physically fit on the site. It's not enough to just have a geotech report saying, yes, we can make it work. There's a lot of other elements in there about maintaining and responding to the public interest. So there's a little more detail outlined on that. It also adds the subdivision and any provincial applications, and this includes applications to remove or subdivide agricultural land reserve, any applications for cannabis or for liquor licenses. And the reason I took that out of the bylaw is we're now subject on those ones to provincial procedures that may change, so I didn't want it entrenched in our bylaw. And subdivision is under the approving officer. So that was the rationale for splitting some of that information. So some considerations, and where I would appreciate some feedback from council, is on these elements. So on the notification buffer for amendments, changing it from 50 to 75. Enough, not enough to be higher. I looked at a number of different municipalities for doing all of this to see what they do. That seemed to be about the middle. Most go a little higher than the 50, some anywhere between 60 and 100 on amendments. Is that sufficient for amendments? Is the 50 sufficient for permits? For the reapplication interval, I have split it. Is that okay, or would you like to see a more consistent approach for both amendments and permits? The permission to proceed report, is that something that makes sense, that is supported? The minor development permit definition, should the area be changed back to the 100? That way any accessory dwelling, guest cottage would not trigger a council meeting on that, so something to consider. The delegation of authority, I've included those three areas related to the hazard and environmental. Is that hitting the right balance of what makes sense to do under technical review or what makes sense to come before council? And any other required changes or additions? And that concludes. Go ahead, one more. No, I didn't. Okay. So that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to go back to that last slide so we
Yes.
have it when we go through? But first, I'm sure there's a number of questions that came from your report or from council's reading. Did go through committee. It's been a while since it, sort of the first time we've seen it in this complete form tonight. So I'm sure there's a few questions. I know I've got a lot of scribbles on my page to ask as well. So, but first I'll look to the committee. Is there anything you'd like to clarify from the discussion? And once we've done that, we'll go directly into these 6 items and sort of do them point by point. Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll just jump in on the 6 items because I had some questions about those in particular. I'm glad they were highlighted. So throughout our term, we've dealt with some issues where we've had applications that actually have affected an area beyond 75 meters, and the notification buffer, in my mind, just was not adequate. So, what's best practice in that situation? I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking 100 and plus in terms of a buffer, and I think that would have worked well in some other situations. But I'm just curious what they do in other communities.
Through the chair, so as mentioned, in looking at a number of municipalities, there did seem to be quite a bit of variation that went anywhere from 50 to 100 for amendments. Some places I've seen would have somewhere between 75 and 100 for amendments in urban, and then if you're in a rural context, they'd actually expand it more because you're usually only hitting one property if you're at 100 meters. And another that I've seen that more recently that I thought might be helpful in here is actually putting a clause in that says we can make the call to expand it. So either the director can make the call that where we have something that clearly it's in public interest, the notification area should be broadened, that we could do that. In the case where something would come forward under that permission to proceed report, where it is a significant, that's your opportunity to say this needs to be much broader or a different kind of notification. So I think there's a number of options there that we could do.
Just to be clear, before we leave that item, right now it's neighboring properties. Is that the statutory obligation? And then above that is voluntary?
The municipalities have a fair bit of scope in terms of actually setting the buffer, but there was requirements to do notification. We have the statutory requirements to advertise, but in terms of where you want to do it for temporary use permits and development variance permits, you have some scope as to what that looks like.
Thanks.
Just if we could have some discussion on that. It doesn't, when I look at urban properties especially, or subdivision properties, West Sechelt, Selma Park, Davis Bay, 100 meters doesn't capture too much of a neighborhood, depending on the kind of development that's going on. Certainly if you think of some that have occurred in Davis Bay, Selma Park in the last 10 years, it was far more than 100 meters of people that were interested. So the notification doesn't mean they're involved. It just means you'll at least let that catchment area know. So I'm not sure what others feel on that, Councillor Inkster. And it's basically about public engagement, right? So you're airing in a larger area. That simply means you're consulting a little bit more broadly. Councillor Inkster?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly sure what the buffer we would decide on or recommend, but I do know that, as you've indicated, in certain neighborhoods in Sechelt, that there's an effect on the neighborhoods and the residents that would be most likely further than that away. One indication that we should consider is the effect that it would have on road use and sidewalk use and any kind of motorized use of a development that adds a number of people and or vehicles into the neighborhood. So that's something we should consider, because as an example, if around Cascade Green you add a substantial amount of homes in there, what you do is you have some issues at Nickerson and Norwest Bay and the highway. You may have issues that go all the way up to the elementary school. So that's a good example, West Sechelt, as to perhaps we should be notifying the neighbors in a larger area because of the effects it'll have on things such as roadways and sidewalks.
Good. Any other comments on the distance issue, the notification buffer? Councillor Seegers, please.
Thank you. I like the idea of the 100 meters. We've all gotten a map around 100 meters for voting areas. It's not that big.
No.
But I also like the idea of putting in a clause similar to what you indicated. I don't know what the wording would be, but that would indicate that if there is a greater impact on an area, that we extend that.
I see a lot of nodding heads. So can we turn that into a recommendation to staff that the notification buffer be 100 meters with additional language allowing a discretionary expansion? Councillor Seegers makes the motion. Councillor Mueller, second. Any further discussion? Councillor Inkster?
So discretionary expansion, based on my earlier points I made, would be elementary school as an example, may have some discretionary notification. That would be an example that the planning would consider. Okay.
Anything else on that particular recommendation? Councillor Lutz.
We do, through our notification, let the community associations know about, so that's also helps to expand.
Through the chair, if I may, to think, it doesn't preclude any of our other options. We do the web, we do the signposting. One point of clarification on the amendments, I had that at 75, to change that to 100. For development variance permits, temporary use permits, did you want that to, I had that at 50, did you want that to remain or did you want that to increase as well?
We may want to have the discussion on development permits before we make that decision, because there's a few things about that. So let's leave it on amendments, and then Councillor Seegers.
How about if you give us some current examples of a permit that would be something that we put out? I mean, I'm looking at how much distance would be, yeah.
Something to keep in mind is that a local road right-of-way is 20 meters. So the road itself takes 20, and the lot depth would be 30. So it covers essentially one lot depth. And as soon as if that 50 meter hits onto any, we take that development as well. So it doesn't need to be the full lot depth. But we did find, we were looking at the notification buffer on Green Court and realized, yeah, it's a little low. It's only hitting really one lot depth. And yet there's a significant interest there that it would have made sense to actually mailed and delivered that notice in a wider area. If we're in the downtown core, it picks up a whole lot more if you're just doing an individual property. But where you've got something where you're surrounded with R4 development, those spaces can be quite large. Or if it's a collector road, that's a lot larger. So you're only picking up one lot.
I think for simplicity, the community and councillors would understand it better if it was standard on
100.
in all cases. I'm thinking of the small one we had on Whitaker. It could have been 50, it could have been 75, but if we always knew it was 100, we'd actually be able to manage that. So any further discussion on the notification buffer? We have a resolution for all those in favor? Okay, that's one thing correct. Before we leave the notification issue, you'd also raised the issue of notifying prior to first reading stuff, which I think is important. But I wanted to clarify, would that always simply allow for an informal public response? You said so we could hear from the public sooner, but of course that would be informal. That would just be their sort of immediate reaction when they get on the phone or email or social media.
What that would actually do when we do development variance permit, that's where it's the most significant. So we're having to do notification on that before you approve something. My concern is that a lot of the public doesn't know about that when you're actually deliberating on it. And so because we make it a conditional approval subject to notification. So I'm suggesting particularly for development variance permits, it wouldn't affect how we deal with the amendments. That's more on a development variance permit. That notification go out before we've actually got it in front of you. So if people are interested, they know to show up. And if they're really concerned about something, you know that. Because I think it does a little bit of a disservice for us to be presenting a recommendation and we actually haven't heard from the people who are being notified. And while it's subject to it, I just don't think it's good, transparent process in that regard. That they really need to know that. We need to know that when we're writing recommendations, that to be able to say, here's what we heard. Either it was fine or, we might alter our recommendation based on that. But it's to give people a chance that they know that something's coming before it kind of shows up in the newspaper.
And so the Marine Way would be an example where there was notification sort of on the way to the council meeting, so they came to the meeting but didn't know ahead of time. Is that one example? Okay, Councillor Seegers?
Thank you. Did you also indicate that would apply for temporary use permits as well? Yes. So development variance and temporary use. Yeah.
Okay. So, Councillor Inkster, please.
So thank you. I'm wondering if, in fact, what you're referencing, that mechanism that would be in place, what it would mean in terms of our process. We've had a couple of situations come before us this term where the decision by council and or committee was that there be a revision of the information and or a plan in front of us. I'm wondering if that particular step or notification would help us get ahead of that, in a sense, not delay and or waste the time of a proposal coming forward that would mean some slight changes or amendments. Is that what we're saying? Because it's one of the things that I've always talked about, been uncomfortable with, is delays and or what would be considered a waste of time if we could get ahead of that. And I've mentioned it a couple of times. So I'm wondering if this would do that, get projects further along.
would that be incorporated, do you think, in the process to some extent? It would allow for modifications before it got too deep in.
It could. I think, if I understand right, I think a lot of the issues that may have more to do with amendments than with the development variance permits. My concern is that we're required under the legislation to notify, so it's a non-negotiable act to notify that, but what we do is we actually ask permission to do that when the report is in front of you. I'm simply suggesting that we would just go ahead. We've received an application. We're just going to do the notification. So when it gets to you, you've got a little more information in front of you than you would otherwise. So it just moves it away from it kind of being a bit of a conditional approval to you having information, or if someone wanted to make a delegation before you've had any discussion, they have that opportunity. Right now, they're kind of after the fact. So that's what it would change.
Okay, so have you built that into your guidelines, or do you want a resolution for guidance on that, or have you already gone there?
All right, that's what I had proposed, so I'm wondering, are you comfortable
there's
with
no
that, to
opposition to
just allow us to do that?
I don't see any opposition at all, so that's good. Councillor Mueller, on that point?
Yeah, I think if I could just speak in a general sense, because I know some of the councillors here were not sitting on planning committee, and they may have not gone through some of this stuff in as much detail as we have. What I'm reading in this report is a variety of mechanisms being put forward as a way to streamline the process and keep everything on track. When we've had instances where things have gotten off track, generally there's one that I've thought of, but they're generally dealt with in this. So I see it's a large scale rationalization of what we're doing, and there's tons in here, of course, but I see it more or less as mostly being just streamlining what we're doing, streamlining it, making it easy for applicants, and also easier for council. So this is just some general statements.
Thank you for that as chair of the planning committee to tell us what went on there. That's useful. Item 2, reapplication interval. Any concerns about the recommendations there, that it would be 12 months for amendments, which is 1 year, and 6 for permits?
I just wonder what the rationale was.
Through the chair, for the reapplication interval period or for the time period? It's a fairly common thing to have in a procedures, and what it does is, in the event where you've deliberated on something and you've made a decision to deny, which usually means it's something pretty significant for you to deny, but you've gone through that deliberation. You've heard from the public, particularly on amendments. These are ones that have had a public hearing, and based on that have felt that it's not in the community interest. So I don't think it should come back right away. And, it just gets away from that almost badgering council of if it's completely different, they've heard it, they've heard the comments, they've changed it, it's a different proposal, that can be dealt with. It's where it's the same thing and you're hearing it again and again. It doesn't do anyone any favors on that. So that was the rationale.
But I think putting a time limit there also tells applicants that there is a reasonable time when they could bring it right back. Might be changes in council or some reason that they do that. So it both protects council from hearing things on a continual basis, but also tells the applicants that it's not closed forever. And that's just as important, that it's not, council makes a decision, so then it's never to be looked at again. Councillor Wright?
Thank you, Your Worship. I suppose that would also stop the badgering of staff, okay? Is that correct? I mean, that's got to take a lot. That's got to take a lot of time when you get a permit that comes to you, and then you have to deal with it, and then turn around and have to deal with it a month later because they're trying to coerce you into doing something that you don't want to do, or that council has denied. So that will be a time savings for staff. Is that correct? Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. So I see no concerns with the recommendations there. That's great. Item 3, permission to proceed report. We'll let Councillor Shanks speak to this first because he's wanted this for a long time. No, go.
Yeah, I think what.
Microphone.
I think what you're indicating is huge to the development community. So often we proceed down a path, and so often somebody reminded me of that twice the other night. So often we proceed down a path where we can cut this thing short right away if we have a preview and recommendations and everything else, and the committee or even council gets a look at this thing before, as you say, the big money is spent. And I think we owe that to the applicants.
So
Thank you.
It would probably come through committee and then to council, and in one sense that might look like another 2 weeks of time, but in the longer term it's probably more effective is the hope. Is that the thinking? And then Councillor Seegers. Thanks.
It is. That's the intention. It was. I've seen it used in a number of municipalities. I think it can really help. One, it gives you a heads up that something quite significant is coming forward. Even if it is, has merit, it gives you an opportunity to kind of guide that applicant and guide staff as to what would you need to see, what do we need to enhance, what do we need to make sure that we've addressed before we go too far down the road. And there are others where, maybe we're applying something quite significant. It's a large comprehensive development zone. It's a significant increase in density. And it's enormously expensive to do a lot of the background work on it. If it is something that truly this is not in the public interest, say it early and put them out of their misery, or guide them as to what would be acceptable or more in keeping with the public interest.
Yeah, I always wanted to take that actually one step further, where there would be a meeting with the chairman of the planning committee with staff putting forward the proposal. But I didn't want to be God, so obviously it has to come to committee. But I think with what you're recommending, that would be an exceptionally good approach to some of the applications that come forward.
And Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I like this proposal. There are other communities that are actually doing this as well. I think it gives the community as well the heads up about developments that are coming forward. Many times when something comes before us for first reading, that may be, for many of the community, the first time they've actually seen some of these proposals. So by bringing this forward with a permission to proceed, the community also gets the heads up. And they can weigh in and let us know, yes, we like this direction, or no, we don't. And staff and the developer do not spend a lot of time and a lot of money moving things forward that the community isn't in support of. So I'm very much in support of this. It does say on here that you would bring it before council. That's on page 33. So you're thinking that would come before council and not one of the committees initially?
Through the chair, it could go either way because I wasn't sure if, as you move forward, what you do with the committee structure, if it should come to committee of the whole, if it should go directly to council. The intention was, I thought on something like this, it probably should come directly to council, but I'll take guidance on whatever you think makes sense.
I think that'll just be a practical concern, and the legal reference in bylaws to council means whatever process it gets there. I mean, it could be committee. It could come directly and doesn't preclude anything by saying it comes to council. Yes, it will get before council. That could be committee stage. The other advantage to this is that now this occurs informally, and developers want to meet with the mayor or sometimes with the director or not, and then they say, well, is the council going to support this? Does a community like this? And it's a hard judgment call to make in the mayor's office. Sometimes it's really clear, and I can say, no, I don't think that'll go, but usually it's much, much better to get this through. And then they know there's a process. If they want to know whether something's acceptable, they know it's going to be brought by the director to the committee or council. And Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is going to provide a lot of clarity to the applicants. And if you've been paying attention to the planning that's been going on in the District of Sechelt over the past 4 years, we've been in boom times. And we've been receiving application after application that are at the very outsets of what could ever be allowable under our policies that exist, and requiring large-scale amendments to the big-ticket items like density, heights. So I think one of my concerns with this is that it doesn't then become a rationale for, it doesn't be taken literally. This is a permission to proceed with it without amendments. And I think that we have to be really clear about what this means. The key items of density, heights, being dealt with, those things. But the rest of it's still going through our basic and what we're all familiar with in terms of council procedure. There, of course, will be amendments after the permission to proceed, but that we know what the limits are.
Yeah, that's really important. I don't know if you can write that into the guidelines somewhere, so that permission to proceed does not mean first, second, third reading and adoption. It just means this looks interesting and positive, and we're willing to proceed to support the process of looking at it, not the end proposal. Very good point. Councillor Leitz.
So this would come to council as a permission to proceed before it went to the APC? Perfect.
Yeah, try and streamline it as quickly as possible. That's great. So that's supported. I don't think we need a resolution on that one. It was item 4, minor DPs, both definition, and there's a couple of other questions I had on that too. And the minor development permits, in my mind, are the key. They rely an awful lot on staff. When councils and staff and community are all in the same place, then delegating authority is not a problem. When things become complacent and they get out of whack, and this council found halfway through the term that there were things being approved under minor development, or the director, when you arrived, he said, how could that be a minor development? That was the way it was done. And so we really do need to find that balance that keeps enough things in front of more than just the one staff person that's deciding it's minor. That was one of my concerns on this issue. And page 41 of your guide, or 41 of our, oh no, that's another item. I'll get back to that later. Page is it? Yeah, page 2, and it's also page 2 of the bylaw, which is page 96. Could you remind me what the intensive residential development permit area is? Permit area number 8, just exactly where that is?
So it's not specific to a geographic area, it's specific to a type of development. So it lists a number of elements under there, both from a subdivision perspective of certain lot sizes. It covers a lot of the infill housing, which is why I had the question around guest cottage. So it really deals with a form, and the intention there of the guidelines is that where we are moving off anything from conventional suburban development that's not in the downtown area, it kicks it into that development permit. So it could even be in relatively rural areas, depending on how the lot size is being considered. So cluster development, the Emerson project, I don't know if you remember that would fall under there. So anything where it is moving into either lot averaging, cluster development, infill development is guided by that particular set of guidelines.
Okay. I think there's 3 things for us to discuss here. One of them is the definition, whether the 100 meters, there's the value issue, again, that Councillor Shanks has been concerned with for some time about whether $50,000 is the right trigger or whether we should have a size trigger. I think we need to think through the lot size, the range you have of 400 to 600, and how that would work and whether it would become a minimum. I understand your attempt to allow them to do better lotting, as you said, better lotting, better subdivision, that's good. But I can also see that 400 square meter lots could become a minor decision made by staff and come as a real surprise if there was a whole subdivision that came in at 400 square meters, for example. And the triplex issue as well, I can think of 2 lots in Davis Bay that if it came through as a minor development and we put a triplex on both of those lots for 6 units of 1,200 square feet each that are now 2 small cottages, the neighbors would be surprised that it was a minor development and they didn't hear about it and it was just passed by staff. So I think there's more to think through on those ones. So should we start with the 100 square meter size one and see how, and perhaps the planning chair, did you have discussions on this?
If I could shed a little light, well, my thoughts on this, of course, my experience in this matter only goes with development boom years. And, but what I've experienced in the past 4 years is that we've been dealing oftentimes with issues of planning that are too small for council. So my focus has wanted to be on the 50 to 100 units or 100 to 1,000, which we've seen as well, those, and to really focus on those because they have such a big impact on our community, and to let the other stuff be dealt with by the professionals that really, it's right in their wheelhouse and they can do it all day long. So that's what I've seen in the last 4 years. I could see if it was less of a boom time, or if we had less units coming through per year, that it would make more sense. But in my experience, more, not less.
Can I ask a question just to follow that up? You can remember a 7-lot subdivision on Marine Way that we spend an awful lot of time with. Would that be too small and you'd like to think council shouldn't have seen that one? When you're saying 50 to 100, I'm just curious.
No, that's a fair question, and that's the one that everyone would point to as the example. But I think with really good staff procedures, something like that just would not have happened. And I think the procedures that we were using at the time just wasn't clear to staff either. Yeah.
Getting the procedures and staff in place. When it's working well, it works well. When it doesn't, we end up with real legacy problems. Councillor Seegers, I see, and then.
Yeah, with regards to that one on Marine, that's one I actually talked to the director about today. And under these guidelines, that would have come before council because it would have required a variance to the setbacks. So it didn't actually fit within the zoning and the guidelines that were already set up. So that would not have fallen under a minor DP, even though it was only 7 lots.
Good example. So following Councillor Mueller's sense of trying to get the small stuff out, does 100 square meters of change seem too large for downtown developments, for example? I can think of 3 or 4 that came in right in 2015 where they were basically blocked because of the $50,000 trigger, and they would not have been blocked if it was 100 square meters. It wasn't that big of a change. Sorry, I'll get closer to the microphone. Councillor Seegers.
Yeah, question. When we talk about the 50,000, are we not talking about DCCs kicking in with the 50,000?
Yes, but I thought that was related to this, not?
No, that would be
all?
different from what we're talking about here. Could you point us where that is actually in the bylaw that you're referring this 100 square meters construction value and value versus area where you've made that change? Thanks.
Thank you for that correction, Councillor Seegers.
Sorry. Through the chair, it's under the definition of minor development permit. So right at the beginning of the bylaw, under definitions, it has definition for minor development permit, and then it picks that definition up into delegated authority. But the definition itself is where it outlines that.
Page
95 and 96 of our
agenda package. Right, and what I'm reading in there is 20 square meters or 20%. That's why I'm wondering where this 100 square meters would come in. Would you be substituting in that?
So that was in the previous bylaw that the effect of this would be to repeal. In the original development procedures bylaw and in the delegated authority bylaw, the value under the minor in the area was actually 100 square meters. So that allowed a lot of the accessory buildings and that sort of thing to come under that. It also added a construction value, which probably made sense at the time it was done, but 40,000 in 2018 doesn't cover very much. So and also it's very challenging to, I don't deal in construction, of knowing, is it 50,000? And so it just had an ambiguity around there. That's why I thought area would be better, because that's what they're submitting is on the site plan, so we can determine it. But that's where those values came from.
20 square meters sounds fairly small, really. 100 square meters is maybe too big, but it's not that. Councillor Inkster?
Just some clarification, because we're talking about big and small. 100 square meters, so if we take what we're dealing with and seeing, quarter acre lots in a lot of cases, how do we then translate that into that particular discussion? Because that's what we're seeing a lot in terms of a development within Seashelt, a lot of the time, quarter acre lots.
Through the chair, it wouldn't be subject to the lot size. It's subject to, so an addition under 1,000 square feet
Okay.
would fall, if it was at 100 square meters, would allow it to be dealt with as a minor. The guest cottages, providing it met every other zoning aspect to it, could be dealt with under minor. So it allowed for, or in industrial, if there's an addition on there, should that be dealt with as a major development permit or a minor? So it's trying to find that right balance where it's not really changing the intent of what was happening on that site. It would still be, whether it's an industrial building or a single detached. Usually it kicks into the alterations and the additions. We don't see too many homes that would fall under that. It really is more of the accessory and alteration.
Be 400. That would be 60 by 60. We're trying to do the math on our heads here. In terms of 1,000 square foot addition would be 10 meters. Pardon?
It's a double shed. So a basic accessory unit shed that doesn't kick into building permit is 10 square meters. So two of them. That gives you, it's essentially a little under a garage size, basically.
And 100 square meters
is so that would be if someone was doing addition on a house, that's essentially 1,000 square feet. It could be coach house would fit under there. If we had the legislation. So that's the trade-off of, should that be treated as a minor or not? Or does it need to be something in between there where we're not bringing every addition into a major, but if you wanted it to exempt out certain auxiliary dwellings, we can write that in. But that is just trying to strike that balance of, is it in the public interest to have a council direction on it, or is it not, and we can deal with it through minor? It doesn't give them a pass on zoning or on the development. They still need to meet those guidelines. It still needs to meet all those things, and I do not have variance power. So it still means it has to meet a lot of the standards. It's not a get out of free jail card. So
I would go back to
requirements.
Councillor Mueller's original comments. We don't want to be spending our time looking at every new piece of construction or amendment to a single-family home, and it's just not what council should be doing. Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, I just wondered about the calculation of areas, that 1, 2, 3 stories? Total area, or?
It would really depend on what the footprint of the building is. We are seeing, because we have a very high accessory building height, 6 meters, you can do 2-story. Right. And we do see a lot of that. something to be addressed in the new zoning bylaw, I think. But certainly the area could fall within there. You could still have two-story. But again, we're still guided by the zoning, so if the zoning doesn't allow something above that, we still have that guidance.
You know, that was one of the concerns about another hearing that we just recently had by one of the adjacent neighbors.
Councillor Seegers, then I'm going to try and bring this particular issue. Oh, it's 8:05. We spent a long time on it. Councillor Seegers.
I think currently, I like what you've got written here because of the ambiguity that we still have existing in our zoning bylaw. Our zoning bylaw needs work. Once that comes forward and we actually get some clarity around things like carriage houses, etc., we may want to come back and revisit this. But I think at this point, I'd be okay with this, even though it is limiting and will require more coming to council.
Councillor Mueller.
I just have one substantive point to raise before we get off this issue, is the issue of public information meetings and the way that factors into the process now. That's written right in to the policy. And I'm just curious, there's a number of times that I've seen with developments here where the public information meeting plays into how the rest of the process flows. And people think that the information that they're getting at a public information meeting is the same as the information that you get at a public hearing or at a council meeting, which it is not. It is much different here. So I'm just wondering how we can deal with that issue in the community to make sure that the information matches and that it's something that doesn't have a negative effect on the process that follows from there.
Through the chair, a couple of things on a public information meeting. So that is very much a developer-driven event. That's not district. I mean, we usually go just to spy on them, but it's developer-driven. And it's their opportunity to really have an opportunity to address the public in a forum that's a lot more casual than what they would face in a hearing. It gives them the opportunity to explain what it is they want to do, what the vision of the development is. It gives them a sense, especially if they do it early, it gives them a real sense of how is this going to go and what do they need to change to make it acceptable, provides them input. So it's really to their benefit. We are in the processes are requiring it, so it's a must for amendments because we want the public to be notified early. We want the applicant to have that opportunity to explain what it is they want to do, but it is in no way equivalent to a hearing. It's a different process, it's different information. The district is not controlling the flow of that information. It's really just good practice for them to do it. What we are requiring is that they need to do a summary report after it, and they need to submit that, and they need to submit that in a time frame that gets it in front of you before a hearing, so that you've got input from the public. So that's what we're guiding the process for it. But it in no way replaces a hearing or is intended to mirror it in any way. It's two very different things.
Councillor Mueller.
Just as a follow-up, that's the important point into the community. Sometimes they don't understand why a public hearing is different than a public information meeting, and I think we need to kind of do a little work around that to make sure that they're separated in everyone's minds.
Okay, if we can get back to the minor development permit definitions, and at the moment we need to decide whether in definition minor development clause A and clause C, they both reference 20 square meters. Is that sufficiently, is it too small, or are other people content, as Councillor Seeger is saying, that for now to proceed with that as the trigger until we get more comfortable and get our zoning in place? I'm hearing people, I don't know if you're agreeing to which part of the sentence. Anyone want to adjust the 20 square meters? Okay, we'll leave that the way it's written in. I have some concern with the definitions in B. I want to know how the lots between 400 square meter and 600 square meter would work, because I think if we saw the standard become 400 square meters, small lot subdivisions as opposed to 500 square meter small lot subdivisions, the community would want to know about that. So how do you see that range working as a minor development?
The intention on there would be, so the minimum lot size in a lot of our zonings is 500.
Right.
So the only way you'd ever see a 400 is in lot averaging. It wouldn't be a subdivision of 400. They'd still have to meet that zoning. If they're not, that's a rezoning, as opposed to something here where it gives an ability to look at those smaller lots and not require to not have that trigger a requirement for a major development permit to do that kind of thing. So it still would need to keep within zoning. It still needs to be consistent with the guidelines and follow that. It's not giving them a pass. It's just saying it wouldn't kick into a major development permit. They'd still need to meet those requirements. It just reduces the amount of process required around it, but it doesn't allow them to usurp the zoning.
So a 10-lot subdivision on waterfront where they had 8 400 square meter lots on one side of the road and 2 very large waterfront lots on the other side would be lot averaged out at 500 square meters. And would that be a minor development?
I'd have to look at that, but I think that's getting away from what the intent of lot averaging
Absolutely,
is.
but that's why I want to be careful about this.
No, I would see it more in if we were doing cluster development, where we've seen, if they had just brought one case in point, we had an application that brought in a panhandle lot, and it required a variance on that panhandle. And the reason is because they didn't want to kick 2 lots into that particular development permit. Had we been able to change the lots in that whole for those 2, that would have been a better solution. But it kicked into too much process. So I really see this as not on any major development. It's really at that, on the margin, it's a couple of lots. I mean, you need to have this so that, no matter who is in this position, you're comfortable with that. But if it was something that was significant like that, or I really felt, I think that's a departure from what the intent of both the zoning and the development permit area guidelines are. I wouldn't see that as minor. But where I'm dealing with something where it's a 20-lot subdivision and we're trying to work around either one area where it's steep slope, and if they could lot average it, it would protect that area. I don't want them kicking into yet another development permit that just creates a lot of process for not a lot of change in outcome. That's the intent of that.
I understand the intent. The whole issue of policy, though, is not for the existing council or the existing director. You develop policy for when you're not there, or
Correct.
we're not there. And how is it going to be interpreted by people who have a very different mindset? Because they'll use the existing policy. So we all of us have to keep that in mind. The other issue in B is when the application is limited to one duplex or a triplex. And moving from single family to triplex seems, in my view, something the community would want to know about more than a minor. Is your sense it not? Or I don't know how other council members feel.
I agree with you.
Triplex zoning.
I agree with you.
I mean, we've had instances in the last 2 years where even with approved zoning, they didn't want duplexes. We all know that. And that was approved. So
Yeah,
I think that there needs to be some rewording on B, on the second clause of the minor development one. That's item 4. Delegation of authority, item 5. Can you, again, point us directly to where 9.3, 9.4, 9.5 are and how it's written in so we can follow your thinking there?
Through the chair. So in the bylaw, that is under Part 9 on page 104. And the intent of this is to deal with both the hazard and the environmental development permits. So in 9.3, that's related to DPA 3 marine, foreshore, and shoreline. And it would allow it to be dealt with through delegated authority under 3 conditions. It substantially complies with the development permit area guidelines. It conforms with the zoning bylaw, and if it requires variances, and the only time we would look at variance is if, in the opinion of the director, it prevents loss of habitat within the watercourse protection area. So it's the variance, and in that you can do that through development permits where it actually helps you achieve a guideline, as opposed to something where you're varying the zoning. That's a development variance permit. So there's a different process in there. So it would allow some variance power, but only under that condition. It's to get a better outcome. So that's the intention of 9.3. In 9.4, which covers rocky beachfront, escarpment, rockfall, and upland slope hazard, same kind of notion that it would substantially comply with the guidelines, conforms with the zoning bylaw, and the required variance, if in the opinion of the director, it prevents loss of habitat within the watercourse protection area or achieves superior siting that protects the natural environment or the neighboring development and addresses steep topography. In 9.5, this is steep slopes. That I put a limit on the lots, that it would be for smaller lot development, 3 or fewer. It substantially complies with the guidelines. It conforms with the zoning bylaw. And again, the variances only allowed if, in the opinion of the director, it achieves superior siting that protects the natural environment or reduces the extent of site alteration. So that was the intention there, is to be a little more deliberate about on those technical development permits of what they would be limited to in terms of delegated authority. Anything over and above that, and there are a number of applications that you have been dealing with that haven't substantially met the DPA guidelines, those would always come in front of you. So that was the intention there.
Okay, thank you for that. And Councillor Seegers, is this the one that would have formed part of the discussion this afternoon with the director in terms of the Marine Way one and how that might have worked on this?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and were you satisfied that these guidelines would have appropriately dealt with that one?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I, okay.
Yes, it would have had to come before us.
Yeah, that's the most important. Okay, I wanted to be careful on that. So if councillors are comfortable and understand how that would work, the question is, should we include them? They are included at the moment. Is there any desire on any councillors to take those out of the delegated authority? We're okay? Thank you for that. And that means that in terms of number 6, required changes, it was only that first resolution that we made that would prevent it from coming forward for first. I wonder if it would help if we gave it first and second reading tonight, allowed those changes that were fairly minor, and then when it came back, there'd be third reading and adoption. Does that make sense from the corporate officer's point of view? And from councillors' views? Okay. Any further discussion of the report and the Planning and Development Procedures bylaw? If not, I'd look for somebody to go back to page 30 and move recommendations 2 and 3, which is that we give first and second reading, and we won't go to third, and that we rescind when we get to adoption all of these other ones. Thank you, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Shanks. All those in favor? That's carried, and that means we can move then to page 94, 95, which is the actual bylaw, and the I'll find the right page. The right page is page 106. First reading of bylaw number 566, 2018 is moved by Councillor Lutz, Councillor Shanks. All those in favor? That's carried. Second reading is moved by Councillor Wright and Councillor Mueller. All those in favor? That's carried. And we'll have third reading come back with the adjustments and minor tweaks that we talked about earlier. thank you for going through that. And thank you for those that are there for your patience while we, I was going to ask another question. I noticed that the bylaw that we're rescinding was actually passed in 2012, and I'm sure that council also was trying to make development move quickly and smoothly. How frequently do you think you would normally be looking at your development application guidelines? And I mean, this is something that will be looked at again in 5 years or 10 years?
In looking at a number of municipalities, it really depends on how it's crafted. Some I've seen that have been in place for 15 years because if they do kind of the bare minimum of, when we get an OCP amendment, we'll do a public hearing. It really just mirrors the Local Government Act, in which case you really don't need to do much of any updating on it. I'm not sure. Hopefully, it stands the test of time. It shouldn't alter if you change the zoning. It's still the same kind of process. It's just what we're processing may change. But I don't think it's something that would be in the same kind of update and amendment cycle that an OCP and a zoning bylaw would do.
It just surprised me because I know the previous council was as more concerned than this council, perhaps, in terms of development applications and procedures. We know the trouble we've had. So hopefully this will make it good for the next council, or 2, or 3. Moving along, item 8.3 for third reading. First, a motion to receive the report. Thank you, Councillor Seegers, Councillor Lutz, all those in favor. And I don't think we actually have do we have a report to speak to?
Through the chair,
Briefly?
I can skip through this really
Or we just run to third
quickly if
reading?
you just want to go.
Yeah, we just want to go.
I'm happy to skip it.
Okay, let's move to the second recommendation that the bylaw be given third reading. Councillor Wright, Councillor Mueller, all those in favor? And we can move to the bylaw itself. And this was halted just for some very minor revisions after public notices and third reading. So we've had the public notices, it's been published, and it's before us today for third reading. Bylaw number 569, 2018, High Tide Avenue Road Closure and Disposition, a bylaw to close a portion of a highway and remove dedication of that portion of highway at High Tide Avenue in District Lot 304 and dispose of it to the Provincial Rental Housing Corporation. Third reading is moved by Councillor Seegers, Councillor Shanks. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. For adoption, item 8.4, I was considering holding this off until after the election so the candidate most in favor of microbreweries could be here for the adoption, but we'll get it done now. We'll move forward on it. First, a recommendation to receive the report. Thank you, Councillor Wright and Lutz. All those in favor. And the recommendation that it be adopted. Councillor Seegers, Councillor Lutz. Thank you for that. All those in favor. And moving to the bylaw itself. Bylaw number 25, 295, 2018, microbrewery and microdistillery. A bylaw to amend District of Sechelt zoning bylaw number 25, 1987 by defining the uses of tasting lounge, microbrewery, and microdistillery, and including them as permitted uses in the C2 commercial zone. Adoption is moved by Councillor Seegers, seconded by Councillor Inkster. All those in favor? Any opposed? Adoption. Well, he's going to enjoy it. Yeah, it's in. And it's just a first step. I know that there were concerns that it didn't extend widely enough across commercial areas, but commercial too will get it started, and we'll see how this works within the District of Sechelt. I think everyone is looking forward to reproducing some of the positive things we've seen in other areas here on the Sunshine Coast and abroad when we travel. Business items. Item 10.1. First, a motion to receive the report. Councillor Seegers, Councillor Lutz, and I'd look to the corporate officer to explain why we'd like to cancel some of the committee meetings on October 24th.
Thank you, Your Worship. As set out in my report, staff is proposing council consider canceling the Planning and Community Development and Public Works, Parks and Environment Standing Committee meetings in October. Basically, those two meetings fall between voting day and council's November 7th inaugural meeting. Therefore, any standing committee meeting business, you may wish to have that be considered by the new council after they were sworn in. And staff also note that should any items come up that must be dealt with immediately, they could be included on the October 17th regular council meeting, or a special council meeting could be held any time up to the inaugural meeting.
Okay, thank you. And the thinking here was we didn't really want a lame duck committee making recommendations to a new council. And new council will want to have its own committees and make its own recommendations coming forward. Councillor Shanks?
Well, I was not going to be in favor of this because I've just had something come up in the last few days that I would like to push forward that requires a decision. I can do it at the October 17th meeting, but it's a question of responsibility in terms of some public works issues.
Or it could come to October 17th. Council.
Okay.
We could look at those things. We want to be careful about. I know it was just a term of phrase, but pushing through.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Obviously.
No.
But so I'd rather it come to a committee meeting.
Okay.
And not cancel it.
But this is October 24th. This would be after the election. I think it'd be better to deal with it before the election if it's important. We can at least address it there, and maybe we can have some discussion informally before that. And we will have the Finance Committee meeting, and if we can put items on the Finance Committee, it is a committee of the whole, so that might be the best place to bring these things forward, because the Finance Committee meeting will proceed because it has time to meet before our last and final council meeting. Any other discussion of the proposal by staff and the reasons for them doing it? Or suggesting it? Councillor Mueller?
Move recommendation 2.
Thank you. Seconded. Councillor Seegers. Recommendation 2 is that the Planning and Community Development Committee and Public Works, Parks and Environment Committee meetings be canceled. The ones scheduled for October 24th be canceled. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Just a matter of trying to keep things flowing the way they should and not the way they shouldn't. Finally, item 10.2, report on the District of Sechelt Communications Plan. A motion to receive the report. Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Lutz, Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? And we'll turn to Ms. Rogers, our communications manager, to walk us through the report.
Finally.
And one recommendation. Is that good to the point
Right.
communications? Yeah. I don't see that in the policy.
This is really the most exciting thing we're going to talk about all night. Communities have official community plans, and we have master plans. We have master transportation plans and master parks plans. Our communications plan is essentially, it's our master communications plan. It's something that makes your communications manager weep with joy. We do a lot of really good things. This is the plan that tells us how we make sure we tell the community we're doing really good things. And it helps us to listen to the community so they can tell us if they agree that we've done really good things. So I started here at the end of January, and in February I began doing some research around the communications plan, and that research involved reading the newspaper and the letters to the editor and doing social media scans. I also I surveyed staff. In a perfect world, you would have given me thousands of dollars, and I would have also done a statistically significant survey. Instead, I had a look at past citizen satisfaction surveys. So I based this citizen satisfaction survey, the communications plan, on that kind of research. And it was pretty obvious, some of the things that we needed to do. And I just wanted to start off with this, and I've Googled it. It's not a quote. It's just something that those of us who work in public relations often say. If our citizens are not informed by us, there is a good chance they will be misinformed by others. So this is why we do the things that we do. Our current state. So after I did my research, I would say that our current situation would indicate that when I got here, our communication was mostly reactive. We would find out that people were talking about us, and we would try to explain why we did the thing that we did, rather than going out to the public and saying, hey, we're going to do this, and this is why. We were coming in after the fact, and we didn't know how to be proactive and when to be proactive and whose job it was to communicate ahead of time and what that looked like. And we had pretty low engagement in our social media, in public meetings. We didn't have a lot of turnout to things. People were talking about us, but not necessarily to us. But we do have some strengths. Thank goodness. One of our strengths is that we have a communications manager position. And that is a really big deal for a small municipality. It means that we value communications and we put somebody in charge. And that doesn't mean that we have one person in the municipality who communicates. It means that we have a position who makes sure the municipality is communicating and that is making sure all of the staff are empowered to communicate. We also have staff who recognize that we can do a lot better and who really want to do a lot better. When I surveyed staff, as citizens and as people who answer the phone and emails and read the newspaper, they recognize that there's things that they would like to do better. They were just not sure how to do it. We also have a council who, in my conversations with them, I recognize that there are things that they would like to do better. And in communications, I want to this is sort of the most important thing near and dear to my heart, is ethical practice in communications. This comes from the Canadian Public Relations Society, of which I am an accredited member. Ethical practice of public relations is transparent. It's honest, open. We have a willingness to share information. We are accountable to our priority publics, our clients, our employers, our profession, and to society. Our public relations serves the public interest, and it's built on integrity and independence, and that is word for word what it says on the Canadian Public Relations Society website. And that is something that we all practice, every person in public relations in Canada. So when we talk about public relations and someone says, oh gosh, look what happened, how are we going to spin that? We're not. If you're saying, oh gosh, what happened? We're going to apologize. Spin means lie. We don't do that. So these ethics, you'll find they're in our communications plan. They're also in our communications policy. And it's just something that I think is really important for all staff that we're going to repeat it again and again and again. So there's no hiding. I mean, if you think about when we're, as an employer, as a parent, as a friend, we always appreciate it more when someone says, oops, I screwed up, rather than, oh, no, it wasn't my fault. So that is what's going to guide our communications. And as for our public engagement, this is a table that is from the International Association of Public Participation. Many of you have probably seen it. I have my certificate in foundations from, it's called IAP2, and 2 of our staff will be getting their training in that this fall. It's hands down some of the best training I've ever received. It's really fantastic. And essentially, it's not good, better, and best. There are varying levels of engagement. And So if you think about it in terms of if we had a park and the playground closed because some of the equipment was damaged, we might need to inform the public. We do a social media post, ad in the paper, playground closed. So that's what that looks like. But if we're thinking, oh, well, you know, some of it was damaged and maybe we're going to replace the swing set, should we replace it with teeter-totters? Let's just do a Facebook poll and find out what people think. That might be consulting with the public. You know what? Actually, let's form a committee and get the committee to report back to council on what the people in that neighborhood like better. That might be a little bit more involved, right? So, and it's going all the way along a spectrum to finally, you know what? Let's borrow $10 million and really blow it up and put in a water park and a pool as well. We're going to have a referendum. So that's empowerment, and empowerment really is just a referendum. So the first goal in our communications plan is internal communications, because that's really the foundation of good communications, is our own internal communications. If we're not communicating with each other, we can't possibly communicate effectively with the public. If you think about it, if our arts and culture coordinator, if she gave somebody permission to have a parade, but she forgot to tell Public Works to close the street, and she forgot to tell the fire department that, oh, by the way, there's going to be a bunch of people in the street and the truck won't be able to get through in the event of an emergency, and she forgot to tell the public, oh, by the way, the streets are closed, that's a communications breakdown. So one of our first goal will be to focus on internal communications and make sure that between departments we know what's going on, and that the staff feel connected to the organization, and that we know what's going on between departments. Our second goal is to increase capacity to communicate with and engage citizens in meaningful ways. One of the things that we'll do is review this plan every year. This plan is essentially a living document. We're not ever going to go there, done. We're going to review it every year. There's a number of actions identified in the plan. We're going to get some of those things done, and then we're going to discover that we can do them better, and we'll start over on them, or we'll find other things that we can do. We're also going to standardize our procedures across the organization. We'll define our corporate identity, which is more than defining your corporate identity is more than just your logo. It's your tone. It's your reliability. It's your honesty. It's your transparency. It's how you conduct yourselves. And we'll improve the tools that we use to communicate. And a media relations strategy, also important. Our third goal is to build the district's reputation as a desirable place to live and do business. We would like to increase the awareness of the quality of life in Sechelt. We live in one of the most amazing places in the province, and in fact in the world. And I think we don't toot our own horn enough. So that's part of it. The other part of it, though, is issues management. And getting in front of our issues instead of behind our issues, and enhancing the capacity of our staff to manage issues better than they do and get in front of issues. And also increase awareness for investors of the opportunities that there are in Sechelt. And number 4, increase citizen engagement and knowledge of the public process. Develop a public engagement strategy. That is on the top of my list of things to do for 2019, is to develop a public engagement strategy. And that's going to be really fun, because we will engage the public on how they want to be engaged and what things they would like to be engaged on. And that's going to be really fun, because we'll find a lot of different ways of engaging the public, and it won't be a public hearing. It'll be fun things. We'll create more opportunities for feedback and increase participation. And we're going to inform citizens about how to be involved and be more informed. And so I don't know if you're aware of our internal processes. When we have large things like this, we take them technically to our senior leadership team first. And so when I took it to them, they said, where's your work plan on this? So What are you doing first? You're right. And so I went back to my office thinking that I was going to go back to their next meeting and give them a Gantt chart of who's going to do what and when. And I went back to my office and I looked at all the action items and I drew out a table, and we're going to do all of them. And we're going to do all of them as fast as we can. So I went back through and I put a few dollar signs next to some of them. And so some of them will have a budget item and I might not be able to do them, but I'm going to try to. But they are all doable. The first thing that I'm going to do is go attend all of the department meetings with the communications plan and the 2 policies, and tell them that they need to do it. Basically telling the staff, you're now empowered. Go and communicate, and let's talk about how we're going to talk about it, and see what they come up with. And I mean, there's a lot of this is going to be for me to do, but I think there's a lot of things in here that each of the departments will start doing, and we're gonna just start, and we're gonna get it all done, and then we're gonna do more, and it's gonna be awesome.
That's great. It makes everyone in the room excited to want to be here while you're doing that. So next 3 weeks will be hard work for everyone. That's great. I'm really just have to say, page 132, as you tick off items 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 are directly out of the strategic plan, some of it directly out of the inaugural address, but it's 4 years. So I'm glad you're here.
Me too.
Councillor Inkster, and then I'll open up for a few other brief comments, and then we'll get to adopting the plan if council has that in mind.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. We've done it in various forms over the years, but what you find every 3 years or 4 years with the new legislation is that you hear things that probably need clarification and or more information to the public, sometimes from other candidates, sometimes in the form of questions, and then the council standing has to clarify them and or provide information to the public. So hopefully this plan moving forward will help deal with those kinds of election issue things ahead of time, because they'll give the public information based on some of the things I've heard. I also like your piece, the piece about revising how you do things, and really once a year because of technology changes and the fact that, you know, maybe we'll be going into whichever become, you know, I don't know if you're doing much Twitter, but I know you're doing a lot of Facebook. You do some Facebook and you do websiting, but I don't know if you're doing Twitter and whatever is next that we revise that. And I wanted to say to you in finishing with a couple of things that I think is good is the For the Record page that is out there, and I hope the public is aware of that and is going on our website to find that information and answer to some of the things that they have been hearing or think they've been hearing, in order to get, once again, clarification and information from yourself about District of Sechelt activities. So I hope people are referring to those resources. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Any other comments? Councillor Seegers?
Thank you. A number of things in here I'm really excited about. I like the fact that you're looking at patterns of work. One of the things that we've had difficulty with through the whole term is how is correspondence handled in such a way that we know it's been dealt with, staff know it's been dealt with, and it actually gets dealt with. So it's nice to see that you're looking at those kinds of things. I like the development and major projects interactive map. So the community can go on there and see where things are happening in the community. That's amazing. The website, redoing the website. I don't know if anybody else has difficulty, but I still have difficulty trying to find stuff through our own website.
The number of times that I spend 20 minutes to half an hour and then write to Carrie Ann, say, okay, I've done my limit of searching, find these documents. It's just atrocious.
Yeah, and then the final one that I think is really good is using plain language in all publications. I mean, even all the, you know, stuff that comes out on, you know, the statutory things that we have to put out. I mean, I know what's happening, otherwise I'd flip by them too, because we need to be able to engage the public. We need them to know that this is something, pay attention to. And, you know, I'm looking at creative way that you'll come up with. So thanks. I love your energy.
Councillor Shanks?
Yeah, in simple terms, this is just the first step in changing Sechelt's image for a considerable amount of time. And thank you for that.
Okay, it sounds like most people are approved, and it's a brief, short master plan too. Boy, at least 400 pages lower.
I wrote it in plain language.
Yeah. Oh, that's why. That's why. One other thing I wanted to mention, other than the strategic plan items that are all ticked off somewhere in here, the ethical practice. Really important. And I noticed the last one, the last word actually in the 4 bullets, independence. I have noticed a fair amount of that. And thank you. Councillor Mueller.
Thank you, Worship. I think the strongest part about this, or from my experience here, the one that will perhaps improve our effectiveness as an organization is the internal communication. So we've, throughout the term, put in a lot of measures that were on the IT end, but are really all about internal communications, and I'd like to see that sorted out so that we don't have any misconnections like we have had between departments and things just being lost off the desk, because we have had that, and I think it's something that bears some focus.
And thank you for reminding me of internal communications, because the other positive thing that's been done is that weekly internal update, which is just a great document. I look forward to finding out what we've done this week. So, and that when that becomes more public, when you have a public weekly update, it might also be good, but it's a great internal document that I know you initiated, but Carrie Ann's been doing, and it's, I think staff appreciates it. I hope so.
Thanks, Council.
And council does. We have then, I'm trying to find the right recommendations, because in terms of communication, it doesn't exactly follow all of our 145. We have recommendations on 10.3 as opposed to at the front on 10.2. So the first recommendation is that council approve the District of Sechelt communications policy. Councillor Seegers and Councillor Wright. Any further discussion? And corporate officer.
Sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
I think to turn our minds to item 10.2, council did actually receive the report.
Yes.
But there's a recommendation there to actually go forward and approve the communications plan before moving to 10.3. Under 10.2, you haven't actually approved or adopted the.
I realize that, but I'm looking for that recommendation in bold on page 131. Can you point me to it?
Just the very top of the page. It doesn't follow our
Oh, I
usual
see.
format,
Okay.
but it's
Council
there.
approved. So we received it, which wasn't there. And then we do have the recommendation that council approve the district, which is also on page 145 as the first recommendation. Say exactly the same thing.
Actually, but they're two separate documents.
One's a plan, one's a policy.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Lutz approving the plan, which is on page 131 and which we've had an outline of. Any further discussion? All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Having a communications plan, we can now turn to a report on policy, which is a communications policy and social media policy. First, a motion to receive that report. Thank you, Councillor Mueller, Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? And if our communications director would like to tell us about the policies on 10.3 that we can approve, repeal, and then approve again. Social media policy.
The communications policy is really just a statement of our guiding principles and ethics. Makes a statement about plain language, once again, that we will provide timely responses to our citizens when they have inquiries, make some statements about public engagement, media relations, and it also makes a statement about partnerships and third-party promotion so that there's no confusion about whether or not we would use district resources for promoting a soccer team's beer and burger night, or whether it's okay that we promote an arts and culture festival that we are a sponsor of. So explaining what the difference is between those two kinds of things. One might be a community event, the other is a community event that we're a sponsor of, and so it's perfectly legitimate that we would promote it. It references our social media policy and also talks about branding and branding elements, so that we ensure that everything that we as a district put out to the community is appropriately branded, so that they know it came from us. Whether it's our email signature or a sign on a lot that's to be developed, or a form for a parade. And also talks about some of the kind of content that we'll put on our website. And do you want me to continue on to what the social media policy is all
No,
about?
let's do that one first.
Okay.
Communications policy, which is recommendation 1 on page 145, and then the communications policy is attachment 1. And the only question I have is, I have two. Under branding and brand elements, do we actually have a district brand identity guidebook, or is that to be written?
No, we do.
We do.
We do. I just wrote it.
You just wrote it. Okay. Thank you.
I just completed it last week. So
I'm sure we'll approve everything in it, and it's good. And when you talked about, you mentioned that our emails and everything have that branding that goes out. Does that mean you're going to formalize the mayor's emails and stuff, that it doesn't go out as "Take care, Bruce," but comes with?
Well, that's a little something that
curious.
I want to work on next. We don't have a coat of arms. So
Yes, we do.
We do?
Earl Bassett, 1993, 1995.
Is it an official
Yes,
Government
yes,
of Canada
absolutely.
coat of arms?
Right from the Queen.
Then I would like
Right
us
from
to
the
get
Queen.
a city flag, and I would
We have
like
a
us
city
to have an
flag.
office of the mayor letterhead.
We have a city flag. No. It's a flag that Earl Bassey's council.
Okay. So
And a
that
coat
would-
of arms.
Yeah, I'll
He
incorporate
was a
that
rich
into our
help.
branding,
Yeah.
because that's important too.
It was really important to Mayor Bassey at the time.
I love that stuff.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor that the council approve the District of Sechelt communications policy. Are there any other questions, Councillor Mueller, or comments?
I just had a question about, we have a council code of conduct and a staff code of conduct, and I'm just wondering if that should be referenced anywhere in this policy.
Well, those are standalone policies.
So vis-a-vis communication,
The,
when we're in roles representing the district, for instance, is that something that should be bound in the policy?
Interesting.
So you think the communications policy should say that when you're communicating, you should follow the code of conduct?
I think under ethics, it might, I think he's just wondering if whether our more general code of conduct should be just referenced, not necessarily given a priority, but referenced under the same ethics, so that we know that that's part of our communications. It's an interesting question.
And I raise it only because we're quoting in the policy, the Canadian Public Relations Society, as opposed to our own code of conduct and our own ethics that are enshrined in other policies.
Well, except that the ethics under CPRS are public relations ethics. So that's sort of those are the ethics and the principles around communications specifically, whereas our code of conduct that we have for staff is around a code of conduct for staff. And so they're both kind of distinct, stand alone. I mean,
It's just a question.
Like I appreciate what you're saying. I'm just not sure that you would reference all of the policies that might come into play, because there's so many policies.
The reverse
that
question
could,
is also
right?
equally important, though. Perhaps the code of conduct should reference the communications policy. So that's something for us to think about, and for the senior management team to think about as we go forward on that. That's a good question. Without any other amendments, all those in favor of the communications policy, which is, just to be clear, attachment 1 and page 141 to 150,
Right.
1452. All those in favor? That's carried. Okay. And you have a motion that we repeal social media policy 1.3.14. I think we should hear about the new one you'd like us to approve before we repeal. Otherwise, we'll have 5 or 10 minutes without a social media policy, and somebody in the audience is going to tweet something they shouldn't. Does it apply to the gallery?
We do tweet, by the way.
Yes.
We do tweet. I would like to Instagram, but I need a device for that. So the reason that I've got us repealing and doing a new one, because our old social media policy is so old. It was easier just to completely rewrite. The purpose of this our social media policy is to just basically state what the guidelines are around our social media use. We're on social media to communicate the business of the corporation of the District of Sechelt, not for any other purpose, and to listen to the citizens. So we've stated right in our policy that we're not ever shutting off the comments. I know there's been some talk of other municipalities, they got tired of being criticized, and so they only use it, to stand on their soapbox and broadcast. And we don't do that because listening is also really important to us. So we've put that right in our policy. It's a short and sweet policy. We also have an internal administration policy for staff that has a lot more of the do's and don'ts and it addresses for staff what kinds of things they can post and shouldn't post, and how quickly they should be responding to citizens' inquiries and things like that. But that doesn't form a council policy. The council policy is really around council's belief in using social media to communicate with our citizens.
Thank you for that. And the fact that social media, not simply technology, but the whole culture around it changes so quickly, is that media policy you called old was June 20th, 2012.
Yeah, right?
So 2020 is going to come just as quick. Okay. Any questions on the social media policy? It's also brief, page and a half, pretty clear. Motion then to repeal social media policy 1.3.1.3.14. Moved by Councillor Lutz. Thank you, Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? And to approve the District of Sechelt social media policy 1.3.18 as presented this evening. Councillor Seegers, Councillor Lutz. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much for making that intense policy discussion as interesting and engaging as you did. Set a high standard for our executive assistant, who is next. Item 10.4, the report from the executive assistant dated September 24th, 2018 be received. Thank you, Councillor Mueller, Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? Thank you. And we'll turn it to Ms. Polson, executive assistant, to give us a brief update on a community associations policy, which has been in the works for off and on for a few months now.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we were approached by the leaders of the community association groups earlier this year in the spring to meet with council to discuss some issues that are relevant to those groups, and also to look at the policy itself and identify some issues that could be improved in it. So originally, the community associations, the policy itself had three main purposes. One was to ensure they were in good standing with the Societies Act, to ensure that any delegate addressing council represented the neighborhood areas that they were intended to, and to verify that the person representing them is in fact an approved person doing that. So through that meeting, there was some issues that were noted. A few clarifications were needed. Some inconsistencies with the BC Societies Act were identified. And some of the other issues were around the neighborhood boundaries. There was a clause in the original policy that said no community association can form within the boundaries of another association. Some people also felt that the requirement to declare the number of members in a community association could be removed from the policy as well. So clarifications were implemented and some changes were made to the policy, including the development of a new application form that would allow groups to identify their own geographical boundaries and their own mandate. The original policy also required a specific type of mandate representing those neighborhoods as well. So the changes in the revised policy could have some implications that I'd like to highlight for council. They're all laid out in more detail in the report, of course, but with the removal of the requirement to state how many members are represented in each association, it could make it more difficult to assign a particular weight to the group's opinion. So as it is for council to decide how much weight to put on anyone's opinion, be it a group or an individual, that challenge will be with the community associations as well. On the positive side, though, the revisions to the policy reduce the barriers that could be overcome to become a community association by being able to identify their own mandate and their own geographical boundaries. It opens it up to a lot of different types of groups that could apply to become a community association. One other item is, because it's easier to become a community association, it also makes the possibility that more associations will register as community associations, which could result in the requirement for more staff resources to process those applications, as well as include them in some of the referral processes, such as those of the planning department. And I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments among ourselves on this particular policy, which has taken a little while to wind its way through? I think I appreciated the report. I appreciated the bit of history that you threw in on page 1 and 2 that took us through how some of this developed and the world has changed a bit. And it's a much, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have said it was a more postmodern world, and there's a lot more plurality and things. We don't use the word postmodern anymore. But the fact that we don't need to divide the community up into places with boundaries and barriers that exclude others, and you can have multiple representation from various sites. And I think the best example is the Davis Bay Parkway Society, which is a community association, quite active, has its own broad membership. It is not in conflict with the Davis Bay Community Association, even though there's sort of some geographic overlays and stuff, but they're actually fairly distinct and bring different views to the table in different ways. There was a time before I got active in public life, which is last century, when there was actually another organization wanting to form a Davis Bay Association because they didn't think the Davis Bay Association was political enough, i.e. they weren't doing enough about highways in 1993. But that was rescinded when the Davis Bay Association decided they would actually take that on and do something about it. So that's a different story. So I think this is useful. I think we can have lots of representation through neighborhoods and communities, and this will be one way to do that. Any other comments before we simply look at recommendations 2 and 3? If not, we'll look for somebody to move recommendations 2 and 3. 2 is that the outdated one be rescinded, and 3 that the policy dated October 3rd, 2018 and attached today is adopted. Councillor Mueller, Councillor Lutz, all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much for your work on that. And 3 minutes after 9, 11.1, councillors' reports. I'll ask you to be brief, but I know they've been very busy as well, so we have to give latitude to actually report those things that have been going on. Councillor Wright, if I can begin with you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Your Worship. I will be brief. Attended the Lions public hearing and also Public Works Committee, and that concludes my report. Thank you.
Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I attended housing dialogue with a number of other councillors in Roberts Creek. I was with the community. The retirement party number of people were there for Doug Kopp, longtime municipal employee. The Lions public information session, public hearing, a couple of election forums. This afternoon, I, along with another number of others on this council, attended the Regional Economic Outlook and Review. And I want to thank Community Futures and the Sunshine Coast Credit Union for putting that on. It's always informative and gives us a view to what they see potentially could be coming down for the District of Sechelt. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. Anybody here went to Oktoberfest? That was a smashing success. We raised around $1,000 for that effort there. All goes towards hosting that party. But I think it was great to see the community out like it was. Enjoyed myself, as I think there was at least 2,000 people there. It was busy all day. Fantastic event. And my hat's off to the SDBA.
Thank you for that report. No election events. Councillor Lutz.
Yeah, he's missing all the fun. I attended this morning a meeting of the harm reduction team that has been working for a number of months and have just been given funding from the province to set up some work on the Sunshine Coast. And that's pretty exciting. It'll be more information out to the community once we have hired a coordinator to do all of that work. So other than all of the things everybody else has mentioned, that's my report.
Thank you. And Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, I guess by comparison, I haven't done a whole lot, but I did attend the discussions up at Chatelache last week, listening to the questions of the under 40 crowd. And it's amazing how many things sort of ring clear in terms of their issues that we've been struggling with all along and will continue to struggle with. But that was a fairly good session. And then, of course, last night we had the meeting at the SIB hall, which was probably our first encounter to be able to meet all the people running for this council. So I'm glad some of you are here this evening as well. But that was an interesting discussion that was had that evening. Unfortunately, some somewhat organizational inefficiencies, I would say, in terms of getting it set up and rolling. But all in all, it was a good evening. And the only other thing I would like to mention is my concern about postponing having the Public Works meeting, but now we're going to address some other outstanding issues that have recently come to light. This has been an outstanding issue in terms of responsibility of maintenance of a particular road.
Okay.
And I've done as much homework as I can on this, listened to 4 or 5 members of staff, contacted previous people, and it just needs to be addressed so that there's a decision made on who does maintain what, who doesn't maintain what. And that's the only reason I'm bringing the issue forward. So I'll give details of that to the Public Works people, in the bylaw people that have been involved, and a short email to members of council so they have a better understanding of what that topic is.
Good.
Okay.
And we'll find room for that on the Finance Committee meeting and through to the acting CAO, if you can make sure your emails go
Right.
to Andrew and to Doug so they can follow up, and then we'll have at least a brief staff cover for whatever the discussion is.
I'll do that this week so it gets out to everybody.
Thank you. And Councillor Inkster?
Thank you. Yeah, there's been a lot of election events, and Councillor Shanks touched on a couple of them, and there was one Monday night, which was good to see. We still talk about the environment, and it's one of the issues we should be talking about and considering. In terms of council business, the Lions public hearing was good. Good to hear some more information about it as it was presented, and hear any public comments, which generally on that subject don't tend to hear a lot. The presentation today, the credit union, that they did and talk sort of an economic update, which I hope we're able to provide that information to our own staff, especially our planning staff. I don't know if Ms. Corb was there, and I think she had some reports to get ready for, but some big ones. So it was good information that a number of us received, and hopefully our staff gets that as well. If we don't, I'd like to ask that we receive it, as I said, for future planning. And I just wanted to end by touching on the Oktoberfest event that Councillor Mueller mentioned, and it's good to see Councillor Mueller in a hat, but not Lederhosen, I noticed, though, so maybe next year. The image, you don't have to protect the public image as much, so maybe we'll see that. I did ask for a commitment from the two of them for next year to do this, because they're probably the best value on the street there. But the other thing I should mention is the size of the crowd, and I will tip my hat that Councillor Mueller was wearing to the individual put on the event. And I don't remember, I wasn't sure if any other council members were there, but it was a busy day and there was a lot of people there. So excuse me if I didn't see others, but it was because there was lots of people. And as was mentioned, there probably was 2,000 people. And rain is always something at the end of September that will change that event slightly, but the rain held off. The day was decent and it wasn't too hot or et cetera or too cold. So it's just a perfect set of events. And I remember doing the first one in 2014. And it was in behind it was basically in the lane in behind. And I remember seeing Councillor Mueller there then, and it's grown to well, it was election time. It's grown to the event that it is now. We need to figure out a way to support and or enhance that event. It was just it reminds me of an event that I keep talking about, which is Blackberry Festival in Paul River. That's what it reminds me of, to see the amount of people there. So we need to keep doing that. And the brewing issue that was touched on earlier was interesting, because I think there was 8 to 10 brewers there, which shows you that if we encourage it in our area, we may see 10 to 15 in the next couple of years that include 2 of our own. So that's why we need to encourage these sorts of things. A great event, and I hope it gets bigger. Thank you.
I'm glad everybody enjoyed Oktoberfest. I think everyone was there at some point during the day, except for the woman going to the Paul McCartney concert, which would probably be a bigger draw, I think. Yeah, a bit of a trade-off. And I can assure Councillor Inkster that he didn't see us, but Councillor Lutz and I saw him. And so, moving on to council course. SCRD report. An interesting board meeting, but we won't report on that. Councillor Wright. SCRD. Anything to report from the SCRD board?
Yes, it was an entertaining board meeting at the regional district. Basically, there were 3 meetings since the last time that this council's met. One was the infrastructure committee meeting, and of course, corporate and admin services, and then the board meeting. I won't go into all the reports. I have the order papers if anybody's interested in looking at the topics. And of course, you can pull it off of the web if you want to see the reports. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 12, items for release. Motion to receive the council correspondence, item 12.1. Thank you. Council seconded. Councillor Lutz, all those in favor? That's carried. I noticed a slight change in this, in that some of the correspondence is actually outcome. So probably good for people to actually see some of the outcomes, but I was surprised to see 2 to 3 letters that were with my signature in the correspondence, but not writing to council yet. Any of those items people want to pull out? They understand them all? Thank you for that. Motion to adjourn. Thank you all. Everyone in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. 9:15. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Thank you for your patience while we went through the policy on development permits and delegation of authority.